That's great, thanks. You know, there's a funny thing about wars. Wars always have to have enemies. You can sort of picture W sitting around when he was gearing up for Iraq and with Rumsfeld and some of these other white dudes, and they were going to go to war, and you know they had it all sort of figured out. And Daddy was calling, and all this stuff was going on. And they found an enemy, and they identified the enemy, and they identified why they want to go. And geez, lots of people that start wars do that kind of shit, right? They sit around, they decide who they're going to kill and what they're going to get by doing that, and it's great stuff. And it's history. They write history. They do all kinds of stuff. And there's a war all around us, and if there's a number, 500. Think of $500. And think of this war costing $500 a second. So if I spoke for 8 minutes, it would be like 250,000, 240,000. And if we stayed here for 2 hours, it would be like $2.6 million. And this is really costing money right now. This is real time. And if you pay taxes while you're sitting here, your taxes is going for this war. It's a great war. Let's go back in time to where it started. Go back to 1939 in New York City in the first mixed race jazz club. And an elegant lady named Billie Holiday walked out on stage, and she was so beloved that she was known as Lady. And she sang a song that would start a revolution, Strange Fruit. And Strange Fruit was a song about the men and women of the South hanging after being lynched in trees with blood-soaked leaves and blood-soaked ground. And about 300 miles away in this building in Washington, you've been to Washington much, they have a lot of buildings, and they do war shit in those buildings. And this little guy was sitting in there, his name was Harry Heslinger, and he had just lost his war with Prohibition. He had all these people working for him, and he was freaking out because, Jesus, his war was over. Now people could drink again. So he thought, well, you know, I'm the head of now the Narcotics Bureau. Why don't I think maybe I'll start a new war. But I don't want to just start any old war. And Billie Holiday became the first person who was targeted by the war on drugs. She was a morphine addict. She used heroin. She struggled. They searched her out. They hunted her like she was prey. And she kept singing, and then finally they shut her down, threw her in prison. She made a deal with the court that she'd go to a hospital. They threw her in prison anyways because she was African American. And Harry hated jazz. And you get a strong sense that anyone that sits in those buildings are in that hating jazz club. Because jazz is too improvisational. Jazz is too off the cuff. Jazz is out of control. You never know what they're going to say. Strange Fruit, my God. She was laying in her bed one day, and they walked in, handcuffed her to her bed. They protested outside, let Lady free. She said a remarkable thing. She said, you know, if I just had had some support from some people, but I feel so all alone. $500 a second is where we're at now. I work in addiction treatment. You know, 250 heroin addicts on a good day is pretty out of control. But behind that, we imprison 2.3 million people, most because of minor drug offenses. Guys, we imprison more people than China does. That's the war on drugs. But it isn't a war on drugs. You have to have an enemy. So what do we do if we need enemies? Well, we make them up. Well, you can't just make up enemies in the suburbs, so let's make them up with minorities. And in our work, the easiest part is the craziness of addiction. The real battle is this war on drugs. Thanks.